Welcome to Tuesday, Dog Nation. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. So glad to have you with us. Busy show for us. A lot on the upcoming NFL draft. Some Georgia players factoring pretty prominently in some of the pre-draft conversation. We'll give you that to you in a couple minutes. We also have controversy today. Dueling opinion pieces at DawgNation.com over the weekend involving a key issue for Georgia on the field this season. We'll try to sort it all out here over the course of the next couple minutes. There's also a lot going on in the SEC. A lot of it transfer-related. We'll do all of it next. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Coming up in just a few minutes, we are mired in controversy around DawgNation. Dueling opinion pieces over the weekend at DawgNation.com. One from me, one from our buddy Connor Riley regarding the big off-season question for Georgia in these remaining months heading towards the start of the upcoming season. So we'll kind of sort all this out here in a little bit in terms of what matters in regards to the unanswered questions for UGA post-spring. We'll do a lot of that with Connor Riley here coming up in just a little bit. Before we get to that, though, the NFL draft is on Thursday, and it's one of those weird things where I hate most of the pre-draft conversation because, it's fairly all typical. You have a lot of negativity. You have a lot of, what almost seems like a, aggressive campaign of slander against some of these prospects, kind of drive them down the draft boards. You see that kind of going on. But for as much as I sometimes don't like a lot of the pre-draft conversation, I do love the draft itself. It's just really good TV to kind of, some of the picks you sort of feel like you already know. There's intrigue like that, say, 3, 4, 5 spot, and then that obviously impacts what happens a lot in the remaining picks there in the first round. This is the kind of the time where it sort of gets really good. It's almost like politics in a way that if you follow politics all year long, by the time you get to election day, you're sort of tired of it. But if you kind of just sort of tune in at the last minute, it all kind of seems sort of fresh. Draft stuff can be kind of the same way, that if you've held off really getting deep into it, frankly, you're probably just as informed as anybody else is, and you're sort of arriving at the right time as we really do separate fact from fiction and figuring out where, certain guys are going. And with that in mind, it is appropriate to begin the show this way by saying there are some former UGA stars who are right at the thick of this draft conversation here as we head towards Thursday, including the two defensive backs, Tyson Campbell, Eric Stokes, obviously the two cornerbacks here. Ian Rappaport put it out on Twitter in response to something that Tom Pelissero had written, that he now sees Tyson Campbell. Let me read this to you from Rap Sheet, who says there are lots of interesting names in the Tom Pelissero story, and it sounds like Georgia cornerback Tyson Campbell has a good chance of going number one, or in the first round, he means. And then obviously he mentioned some other stuff there too, but a Rap Sheet saying now he thinks that Tyson Campbell has a good chance of going in the first round. But Tom Pelissero took that a step further, not just Campbell, who has a chance to be a first-round pick, according to the NFL.com writer. He says Eric Stokes potentially has a chance there as well. What Pelissero says is that both Campbell and Stokes helped their cause leading up to the draft with blazing 40-yard dash times at Georgia's Pro Day. Campbell was a 4.36, Stokes was a 4.29. One GM apparently tells Tom Pelissero, says that if there's a run, meaning a bunch of cornerbacks get taken, then both of these guys could end up going in the first round. I think Campbell has a little more upside. Stokes is a little closer to being able to play immediately. He goes on to say, this is Tom Pelissero at NFL.com, that ball skills are part of the question on both players. Stokes, 6 foot, 5'8", 5'8", 7 inch, 194 pounds, did have 4 interceptions. Campbell tied for the team lead with 5 pass breakups. He says that with just 2 cornerbacks, J.C. Horn and Patrick Surtain, virtual locks for round 1, and the stock of Virginia Tech's Caleb Fairley clouded by 2 back surgeries, it's a matter of when the next tier of corners begin flying off the board, either late in the first round or early in the second round. That does seem to be kind of the tipping point for those guys right now. But what's interesting is, with Tom Pelissero writing this for NFL.com, there was also a story at CBSSports.com that essentially made a similar case. It called both Stokes and Campbell kind of the hot names right now, guys who are going up the draft board, and it seems like those 40-yard dash times kind of help with all of that. So And, I've told you before that I'm a big believer this kind of stuff matters. I do think that Georgia's reputation is bolstered when it has players selected in the first round. Kirby Smart's reputation as a player development guy, I think is added when you have, guys like this, especially in the case of Eric Stokes, who did not come to Georgia as an elite recruit, but certainly played that way during his time on the field. To see NFL.com, Tom Pelissero, Ian Rappaport, CBSSports.com saying those things about him, I think that's all really good, and I think it heads towards what could be a fairly nice feel-good story for Georgia Thursday at the start of the NFL draft. Another example of that is what's going on with Richard LeCounte right now. Now, LeCounte doesn't really factor into that first-round or high-end draft conversation quite as much. Did not have a great pro day, probably admittedly, and also coming back from injury based on the motorcycle accident he suffered near the end of last season. But Daniel Jeremiah, another respected draft name, also someone who works for NFL.com, has also recently kind of come to the defense of LeCounte after some folks were kind of doubting LeCounte's pro credentials after what was probably not a great pro day. I read this from our friends at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution at AJC.com, but what Daniel Jeremiah said in a recent teleconference was, talking to a bunch of teams that have all the GPS data on Richard LeCounte, he says if he plays, you're going to see do the equivalent. He plays like he's a 4.4 safety, meaning someone who plays faster than his pro day stats would have suggested that he runs. Daniel Jeremiah saying that's how he plays on the field. He did have the accident. I don't think he's fully recovered from that. He did not run well his pro day, but this is what Daniel Jeremiah says. Most of the teams I've talked to are forgiving the workout and believing the player they saw on tape. Now, I like that because I'm rooting for Richard LeCounte. And it's amazing how many Georgia fans do. At the UGA bookstore for G-Day the other day, when LeCounte was signing his autographs there that day, he had a huge crowd of folks gathered to be there with him, get that photo, get that autograph. It just kind of gives you an idea of just how many people are rooting for LeCounte as he goes on to the next level. So the idea that Daniel Jeremiah says, when it comes to LeCounte, folks are more interested in seeing what he did on the field in his game film than they are kind of what happened for the pro day. I take that as good news. But beyond the fact that I'm rooting for LeCounte, I take that as good news as well, just simply because isn't that the way you want football to be? I mean, don't you want what guys prove during games on Saturdays against elite college football conversation? Don't you want that to matter more than the kind of arbitrary evaluation of what may have gone on at a pro day? That's just the kind of football evaluation I'm a lot more comfortable with. And so if that's truly the way that Daniel Jeremiah says that LeCounte's going to be treated when he finally goes, maybe I think Jeremiah's projecting maybe like a 4th-round pick or something along those lines, at least having a chance to be drafted that high, then I just think that's pretty good for football all the way around. Now, admittedly, there's another name here when it comes to the draft stuff for Georgia that I'm fairly curious about, because I saw where, I think it's Chad Reuter, is it the guy's name that works for NFL.com? He did not have Georgia outside linebacker Azeez Ojulari in his most recent first-round projection in the latest mock draft. Other mock drafts I've seen still do have Ojulari there in the first round, but he's also one of these guys that seems to be in that kind of late 20s to early 30s on most of these so-called big draft boards. I will say the same thing about Ojulari I said about the cornerbacks Campbell and Stokes a moment ago. I think it is helpful for Georgia. Now, listen, I root for Ojulari. I hope he has a great pro career, but I do think it's helpful for Georgia if it can get Ojulari into the first round on Thursday. At one point in time, I thought he was fairly close to a first-round lock. Maybe it just seems like overall the edge rushers aren't quite as beloved by this version of NFL GMs and draft scouts. They kind of go through all of this, and so it seems like Ojulari is getting a little bit of an evaluation on the basis of that he's more of kind of a stand-up outside linebacker in a 3-4 defense than he is kind of hand-on-the-ground defensive end in a 4-3, and so maybe that affects his draft value just a little bit. But from the perspective of Georgia and putting the best foot forward for the program on draft night, clearly I'm rooting for Ojulari to be taken there in the first round. So if you're kind of following all of this, let me kind of sum it up. It seems like as of now, guys like Stokes and Campbell are kind of on the rise. Names to know as you head towards possibly even being taken there on Thursday night in the draft's first round, and if not that, maybe in the second round. Ojulari kind of teetering, it seems, in the late part of the first round. In some cases, mock drafts having him in the first part of the second. And then other guys like Richard LeCount and some of the rest of these UGA names also looking forward to having their names called here this weekend. It's going to be a fun NFL draft. It's always great TV. It's nice to see UGA factoring so prominently in that discussion. And obviously, we'll have a lot more on that over the next couple of days as we get ready for Thursday night. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. It is so nice to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast, wherever you find them, the Apple Player, Google Player, world-famous DawgNation.com, Spotify. Many of you listen right there directly through SoundCloud. Of course, the show always available as well on the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today. And, of course, a huge thanks to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia for making all this possible. You know, as a homeowner, which I am, I can tell you that I spend a lot of time thinking about just the structure of your home, right? You don't want water creeping in. That can be the sign of a serious problem. When those cracks maybe show up on your walls, especially, basement walls, foundation type stuff, that's the kind of thing that just gives you a little bit of a pause if you ever see that. Well, here's the one thing I want you to think about if and when you do see that. My friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia, who are experts when it comes to foundation and waterproofing issues. They have 2 full-time engineers on staff. That means smart people who can do great things for you to kind of fix some problems you have. Now, the good news is sometimes these problems aren't super, substantial. It's just a simple hardware store trip type fix. And if that's the case, then they'll tell you exactly how to do that. But when it's more than that, you want good people doing the work for you. And in addition to that, it's also great to do business with ESOG because they're proud partners of UGA. Obviously, we like supporting those who support Georgia football, and they've been great friends of ours here on DawgNation Daily for a long time. And that's another thing that I think makes them fun to do business with there as well. Easy to get in touch with there also. Just simply give them a call, 678-ESOG now. That's right. Dial this number, 678-ESOG now, and that'll get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. All right, we have Connor Riley coming up in just a moment. And one of the interesting discussions we're going to have with Connor today is apparently a slight difference of opinion from him compared to me about what the big issue for Georgia is as we head towards the offseason. Connor had a great piece up at DawgNation.com yesterday morning regarding the offensive line, and I don't want to put words in Connor's mouth. Connor can explain this for himself here in a moment, but that the offensive line right now stands as a more significant concern for Georgia than the defensive back situation, just given the fact that you've got at least one starting position in the offensive line that's not quite settled. It's probably more accurate to say that Georgia right now doesn't know who its best 5 is. That's the language that Smart always uses, meaning that certain guys, Jamari Salyer in particular, candidates to start at a couple different spots there, and so figuring out the best 5 still hasn't fully been accomplished that yet for UGA. I have said on the show last week, and I wrote this on Sunday at DawgNation.com, with as much respect as I do give to that idea that you got to figure out your best 5 and all of Georgia's hopes offensively. Big year from JT Daniels, big year from a deep, stable and crop of running backs, improved play from the wide receiving core. A lot of that can't be accomplished if you don't have really good play from your offensive line. In fact, on one of the shows a few weeks ago, we kind of referenced a meme that Cincinnati Bengals fans had been passing around about what happens for Joe Burrow and whoever you have at wide receiver if you don't have good play from your offensive line. That makes a lot of sense to us, that you got to have that good offensive line protection to get everything you want to get offensively. But when it comes to comparing unanswered questions for Georgia, to me, I believe it's easier to find an acceptable answer for your offensive line than it is for your defensive secondary right now, simply on the basis of one idea. The one thing that I do believe that the Georgia's offensive line has going for it, that maybe right now the cornerbacks in particular, don't say secondary overall, but cornerbacks in particular don't quite have going for them here at the moment. This, I think, is best explained by something that Cole Kubelik, the SEC network analyst who saw G-Day from the field last Saturday and was a part of the coverage there of the SEC network. Cole, in talking about the offensive line with Mike Griffith 2 weeks ago, I thought the way in which he discussed how Georgia can navigate the kind of early days of the new-look offensive line, to me, this made a lot of sense. So let me let you hear this as a way of continuing this conversation. This is Cole Kubelik on Georgia's offense and offensive line in particular.
I think it's going to be a fantastic offense. I think it's going to be a fascinating watch because I think that there will be micro areas of growth throughout the course of the season. I think the first one to watch will be the offensive line. I'm not necessarily sold on the first offensive line that you get will be the offensive line that starts the majority of the games, because I think there are some younger guys that are going to have a chance to play their way in. And also, I think, too, when you have maybe some continuity and chemistry issues, you just lean towards experience, because that will get you out of trouble more times than maybe talent will.
It's that E word that Cole uses that matters so much to me, the presence of experience for this Georgia offensive line. Guys like Justin Schaefer, who've played a lot of football. At this point in time, Jamari Salyer returns as a full season starter. The same thing for Warren McClendon there as well. You know, that is a lot of kind of what's out there for Georgia right now. That experience does provide Georgia an opportunity to kind of figure out its best five with comfort with some of the other spots there along all of that. So I think it is fair to say that the unanswered question about who Georgia's best five is probably something worth paying attention to. But overall, because of the presence of that experience, I do think finding a satisfactory, acceptable answer is a little bit easier, which is not to say that I don't think eventually Georgia will do the same thing at cornerback there as well. But when it comes to experience of actually guys having been on the field and earning their stripes over the course of the last few years, Georgia just has less of that at cornerback than it does at the other spots. That's kind of my take on that. Connor has a little bit different opinion. We will do that with him coming up. Let me also remind you, as we wrap up around the Dawghouse here today, that the Kroger 5-Star Moms event promotion continues there at DawgNation.com. And if you want to find out more about this, you can go to DawgNation.com to get all the details and to find out how you can nominate a mom in your life, whether it's your mom or just a mom that you know, maybe your wife, to be honored as one of our Kroger 5-Star Moms. It's going to be really fun. Coming up in a few days, we're going to spend 5 days, and each of those days we'll name a new Kroger 5-Star Mom, and I can't wait to celebrate these moms on our show, and really can't wait to give a tremendous gift pack here, which includes a $50 Kroger gift card, a $50 Bath & Body Works gift card, a $50 Home Chef gift card. This is a really nice prize pack. So go to DawgNation.com to find out more details, or if you're ready to just make a nomination, info@DawgNation.com. That's the email address, info@DawgNation.com. I talked to our buddy BJ, who helps us kind of behind the scenes here at DawgNation. He was actually telling me that we've already gotten tons of submissions for this, and he said some of the stories that he's read are really pretty terrific. So, and a lot of our DawgNation folks kind of helping us behind the scenes on all of this. So huge thanks to all of them, and it's so nice to hear so many great stories as folks just kind of celebrate the moms in their life. What a really cool thing to be able to do. I'm glad we're able to do that here. Now, by the way, speaking of Kroger, it's also what's going to be a part of what happens with Connor Riley here. It's a Kroger Fresh Take with Connor Riley. Glad to have you with us as DawgNation Daily rolls on right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, so we'll bring on Connor Riley. A little bit of a difference of opinion in terms of my belief that, hey, offensive line for Georgia post-spring appears to be a little bit of an issue, but maybe the chances of coming up with a good solution to whatever you still have questions about it, just, more likely because of the overall talent in the room and the experience that Georgia can lean on. I, speaking as a fan, a little bit more concerned about defensive back, cornerback in particular, just because you don't quite have that same level of experience. The key to a successful position group is always going to be the intersection of talent and experience. Plenty of talent at cornerback, not quite as much experience. Connor, it sounds like, though, you, based on what you wrote at DawgNation.com yesterday, have a difference of opinion.
I'm disappointed in you, BA.
Why is that?
You spent years, and I mean literally years, railing about the importance of Georgia needing to get better on offense, about the importance of Georgia taking that step to have an elite offense. And in that first game against Clemson, you know what's going to win them that game? It's not going to be defense.
That's true.
It's not going to be defense. And we've talked about this before. I've shared my views on it. Defense just doesn't matter as much as it used to in college football. I think if you can get a few sacks and tackles for loss here and there, that'll help. But winning the way that Kirby Smart did in his time at Alabama and even on that 2017 team here at Georgia, that's not how you win in college football anymore. You need an elite offensive line, and I don't see that right now for Georgia. It could get there eventually, but that first game, if Georgia loses, I think the biggest culprit is going to be that offensive line play because they will be unable to block Clemson's defensive front.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point and we've said this before, because Clemson is so good with its defensive front, that's the kind of thing that could get you beaten in that game. I guess, though, my belief is, and, I don't quite know where Kirby is in all this. He certainly alluded to this, but I don't quite know, how far down the line here Matt Luke is on this, that if you had to go with Jamari Salyer at left tackle, Tate Ratledge at either like one of the guard spots, maybe Justin Schaefer stays at left guard, Tate Ratledge becomes right guard, but Schaefer and Ratledge as your two guards in some form or fashion, with likely Warren Erickson at center and Warren McClendon at right tackle. To me, that seems like as good an offensive line as you might be able to hope for, with the idea that maybe Salyer moves back over to guard before the season is done. But, I don't want to be, too cocky about all of this, but if that was my offensive line against Clemson, I don't think I'd be that worried about that.
I just think back to that Cincinnati game. That Georgia offensive line did not play well that day. And, yes, Xavier Truss was making his first career start, but someone is going to be making either their first or second career start on that Georgia offensive line against, I think, a much better Clemson defensive front. Georgia only ran for 45 yards that day. JT Daniels was under constant pressure, got sacked 3 times in that game. And again, you can, I think, scheme up ways to help out your cornerbacks. Kirby has said they have to get better at playing zone coverage. I think you're going to see a lot more of that out of Georgia this year. I think they can go into the transfer portal and address some of the experience issues, and I expect them to actually do that at the cornerback position.
Yeah.
On the offensive line, if you can't block, that messes up everything else you want to do, especially for a Todd Monken offense that wants to take vertical shots. Those plays take time to develop, and if you can't block or hold your blocks long enough, that just doesn't allow you to do and operate the way Georgia best wants to.
So let me see if I can kind of distill this down to what I think you and I really are truly different on. I'm pretty sure that neither of these position groups end up being bad. Mm-hmm. But I think that the cornerback spot has a better chance of being, air quotes here, bad than the offensive line. I just have a hard time believing, given the collection of guys who have played versus young guys who are really talented who haven't quite played yet. And listen, I hope I'm not, as I said before, just being too cocky or too flippant about this. I have a hard time believing the Georgia offensive line will be bad. At the very least, I think even against Clemson, it could be adequate. Maybe I'm just underrating the need to find that fifth starter here or figure out who your best 5 is and capable roles. But I have a hard time believing the group itself ends up being bad.
I absolutely think, though, that Clemson's defensive line could make Georgia's offensive line look bad.
Well,
go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was just agreeing with the.
And look, we can discuss off-season concerns, cornerback play, but you can't tell me that you're sitting here worried about what Luke Doty is going to throw, how Luke Doty is going to throw the ball against this Georgia secondary, or Ken Navy Seals is going to look at Vanderbilt's quarterback in that late September game against Georgia. When I going forward, when I say off-season concerns, these are all geared toward that Clemson game, because that Clemson game is so important for what is going to set the tone and tenor for this season. And to me, if there's a weak link that Georgia can get exposed and that can really gum up what Georgia wants to do in that game, it's that offensive line and getting outplayed by a Clemson team.
So my last point on this, and we'll shift gears and talk about something different, is that your first point is obviously a strong one, that, listen, this is an offensive sport now in 2021, so therefore any issue in offense is going to matter slightly more than issues on defense. However, what you need cornerbacks for in 2021 is not to hold your opponent to 17 points. What you need cornerbacks for is to make it just one less big play during a game. Because go back and watch the Alabama LSU game in 2019. Like, think about all the big plays that go on back and forth there. But it's just like one extra big play for LSU on the road that allowed them to get the win against Alabama in that spot. Alabama still made some fairly big plays in that game against LSU in 2019. But when you can make that just that one pass deflected when you really need it, that one, quarterback pressure when you really need it, just that one subtraction of a would-be big play sometimes can be the difference in winning and losing. And so that's what I need capable cornerbacks for. It's not to lead the nation in fewest points allowed, because sometimes that's a little bit of a misnomer type stat, but it's to limit the big plays against a big play offense. Instead of 4, can I keep it to 3? Instead of 5, can I keep it to 4? Can I make it one less than otherwise would have been? Because subtracting one 26-yard pass a lot of times is the difference in winning and losing.
If I could retort here, I'd look back at the Georgia-Alabama game last year. Georgia stopped getting pressure on Mac Jones late in that game, third quarter, fourth quarter, and at that point it was over. Alabama's offensive line took over that game and really allowed them, I think, to really win that game, especially when you have the skill talent that team has.
I think so I said I was going to be done, but I'll do one more here. So who do you think, if we assume that the 4 of the starters for Georgia are Salyer, I'm going to say Erickson for now, take a liberty and say that, although I think that SVP is going to be hard to keep off the field forever. But Salyer, Erickson, Schaefer, McClendon. Who is the fifth person that, let's say for now, starts against Clemson?
Today, April 27th,
Yeah.
I will say Xavier Truss.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a big job for Truss. There's no question about that. That is a very, very big job. So you do think it's Truss at tackle more so than Ratledge at guard?
Yeah, I think they want. I mean, Tate will play a lot in that game, but they want experience there, and Truss does have an experience edge over Ratledge when it comes to that.
All right, let me move on here in our Kroger Fresh Take and talk to you about this here for a little bit. I talked offensive line a moment ago, or I should say I talked NFL draft talk a moment ago. It's fun for me to see Tyson Campbell, Eric Stokes seemingly on the rise here, at least in the eyes of the media. We'll find out if the NFL GMs actually feel that way. A little concerned about some of the stuff I've heard about Ojulari as of late. You obviously follow the draft stuff a lot more closely than I do. This is only a passing fancy for me, where it's a little bit more of an obsession for you. What do you make of the Georgia guys ahead of Thursday?
Thursday could be, I think, a really good night if things break the right way, and they could potentially get 3 guys in the first round, which is absolutely what I think you need, especially to try and sell to recruits that you can develop guys into first-round talents. I also think Georgia could see 0 guys taken that first day, and to be like, some of you might think this is overblown. If Georgia has 0 guys taken in the first round on Thursday, that's disastrous. To me.
It will be a negative recruiting point, and it's one of those things where, like, I say the phrase honesty compels me to admit a lot. This is one of those things where you just sort of have to be honest. There are wins and losses in life. And when it comes to the draft narrative, things like that, if Georgia were to have 0 first-round picks, that would be a little bit of an L. Now, listen, it's not the kind of thing you can't overcome, because they're going to have, a great chance at multiple second-round picks.
Yeah,
And obviously,
you'll have 3 guys in the top 15 picks on Friday.
And obviously going to have a ton of guys who, as you head towards next year's draft, are going to still get, big-time buzz. But this is one of those things that people are watching for. They are watching to see how well Georgia develops guys that come through the program. And I have said this before, that this is an area that Georgia has lagged behind the very best in the SEC, the very best in college football, in terms of the front end of the NFL draft, where Alabama may have 5 first-round picks. They may have
6 potentially.
Yeah, they're going to have 4 in the top 15 or something crazy like that. You got, Waddle flying up the boards right now. Obviously, Devontae's right there, quarterback, and then Surtain as well. Najee has a very good chance of being a first-round pick too. That comparison is ongoing, and it is the kind of thing that you have to be mindful of. And I still think that Kirby gets a little bit of a bad rap for some of this kind of stuff, because he hasn't been at Georgia nearly as long as Nick Saban has been at Alabama. He just hasn't been around, quite as long, so he hasn't quite have the machine working there yet. But it would be a little bit of a setback if, the 2018 class, which was a number 1 rated recruiting class, if that group of juniors, some of who've decided to move on from the program, if they were to move on and that group didn't produce a first-round pick, that would be noticed by some people.
Yeah, and I think the reason this year in particular it's a little bit worse for Georgia is you no longer have this excuse that these aren't Kirby's players. These are all guys that Ben Cleveland was signed in 2016, so he spent his entire career with Kirby Smart. 2017 seniors, 2018 juniors. These are all guys Kirby Smart evaluated as recruits and coached up at the University of Georgia. And I'll let you guys in on a dirty little secret here. The only thing recruits really, really care about are getting the college football playoff and going in the first round of the NFL draft, or becoming a high NFL draft pick. They can say fans, academics, coaching staff, whatever. Those first 2 things are far and away the most important thing. And Georgia, the last couple of years, hasn't been able to get into the playoff, but they've at least been close, and if a few breaks go their way, maybe they get in there. This, on the other hand, if they get 0, which I think they could, Aziz is sliding a little bit to me, and I think the reason for that is that he just doesn't have the same athletic upside that, say, a Jalen Phillips out of Miami, Gregory Rousseau out of Miami, Kwity Paye out of Michigan has, just because he's only 6'2". If he were 6'4", he'd be a top 15 pick, no doubt about it in my mind. And so because of these guys sliding and potentially falling out of the first round, it's a concern for me going forward, because it's something you're absolutely going to hear, and until you start to see those guys consistently developed into first-round draft picks, it's going to be a question, and ultimately that goes into potentially hurting Georgia on the recruiting front.
So a couple things here. First of all, for Ojulari, if you just want to evaluate him as a player, he's still equally good as a player if he's taking 36 or 29.
Yes.
Right? Like in terms of his value.
It's pure marketing.
Yeah, as a player, he's still the same player, and obviously there's so much like about Ojulari. I'd be shocked if he isn't a good pro. But this is a marketing thing of, can you go in the first 32? One thing I'll admit to not knowing as much about, I know the life-changing money that comes from being one of those first 32 players selected. What is the financial drop-off of being a second-round pick?
So obviously the guaranteed money you get shrinks as you go deeper into the draft. The other thing that is, I think, important to keep in mind is teams have a little bit more control over their first-round picks. They can extend them to a 5-year contract right away, whereas second-round picks are automatically automatically 4-year contracts. So if you're Aziz, while you might lose a little money up front, if you're a second-round pick, in the long run, it might be better for you because it does allow you to get to that second contract sooner.
How about some of the other names? I see Trey McKitty showing up in some of these conversations in a pretty interesting way. Anybody else from that kind of sort of, I guess, next level of Georgia draft prospects that you think is kind of interesting at the moment?
Yeah, I think Ben Cleveland and Monty Rice will be interesting to me. See if those guys can go late third round on Friday night as opposed to Saturday morning. I think if you can stock those guys up, because ultimately I do think those guys are both NFL players, and it'll be interested to see how NFL teams view them. McKitty's fascinating to me, much in the same way like Charlie Warner was. Like, I don't think a lot of people expected Charlie Warner to get drafted last year. Goes in the 6th round. McKitty is similarly a Georgia tight end, fewer than 10 catches over the course of the season, going to be an NFL draft pick.
And Warner was really active for most of the season last year for San Francisco.
He played.
Right?
He played. I mean, San Francisco was devastated by injuries, but he played a good bit last year for them. So McKitty's interesting. Ultimately, the guy that is the most interesting to me is Richard LeCounte because, yes, he did not test well in his pro day. That was not the best version of Richard LeCounte that I believe we have seen. But look, I watched him play for 4 years at Georgia, really starting the last 3. He was absolutely, in my mind, the best defensive player in the SEC through the first 5 weeks of last season. He can absolutely play at an NFL level. As a New England Patriots fan they're a team that needs a safety, I'd be thrilled if they got him in the 5th or 6th round as a potential guy that could play for them early on.
And listen, really, the biggest name out there, I think, when it comes to draft conversation, at least the most, I would say, respected name for me is Daniel Jeremiah. I like him better than the guys that do it for ESPN. I mean, if Jeremiah is being quoted by the AJC as saying, some of the things that he said that I read off the very top of the program today, I mean, like that's a fairly good endorsement if you're LeCounte to get that kind of praise from Daniel Jeremiah as someone who played much better than his pro day film would have showed you.
Right, and Jeremiah mentions the GPS numbers. Georgia has that information. We'll absolutely release it to teams. And again, you put on the tape, he is an absolute difference maker, or was for this Georgia team. I think if he's out there against Florida, that game goes a little bit differently. Does Georgia win? I don't know. Certainly not with the quarterback play they got that day. But the defense certainly doesn't give up the 44 points and 400-plus passing yards that they did with him out there. So he was a true impact player for Georgia, and I absolutely think he's got the skills and ability to be a starter-level player at the NFL level.
All right, Kroger Fresh Take here with Connor Riley. I want to talk about the latest in the Dan Lanning situation here coming up in just a moment. Before that, let me remind you, we're doing our 5-star moms. We're there with Kroger. Also, if you want to just celebrate your own 5-star mom in your own way there, Kroger can help you get stocked up for all of that. Gifts your mom will love. You can get those at Kroger. Also, chocolate candies, all that kind of stuff. Also, the outdoor stuff. We think about Mother's Day kind of being that entryway into the spring and all the fun that kind of goes along with that. Well, don't forget patio furniture and all kinds of really cool gift cards, greeting cards, all of that as we head towards Kroger and Mother's Day. Website to go to Kroger.com/Mother's Day. That's Kroger.com/Mother's Day. You can find out a lot more about that. All right, quick timeline on the Dan Lanning thing. Obviously, in January, we found out that Lanning, after overtures from Texas, was going to stay at Georgia, not take the D.C. job there. But then in March, after Les Miles was let go at Kansas because of some things that happened years ago to LSU, Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports had mentioned the idea that Lanning, because of his ties to the state of Kansas, his time growing up in Kansas City, that maybe he might be a candidate for the Kansas job. Then on Friday, we talked about this on DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG, that Football Scoop was suggesting that Lanning might be one of the names that actually interviews for this job. But since then, I think we've seen the news cycle kind of spin the other direction. The latest, Adam Rittenberg from ESPN, kind of pointing out that the prime candidates, the top tier of candidates for that Kansas job, are some of the names we've mentioned before. Lance Leipold from Buffalo, I think Jeff Monken from Army. The only non-head coach that I saw on the Adam Rittenberg list was Mike Elko, the defensive coordinator at Texas A&M. At this point in time, Connor, we, I think, can move off the idea that Lanning is a serious candidate to leave UGA right now, because somehow I don't see anybody, I don't see the entirety of this top group turning down Kansas. Monken, I think, actually wants the job. I think he's made it known that
Jeff,
he does.
not Todd.
Yeah. To be very clear, this is Jeff Monken, the Army head coach, not Todd Monken, the Georgia offensive coordinator. I think the Lanning part of this is just about done.
Yeah, it never really made a whole lot of sense to me when you consider, I think if he waits, I guess, 7-8 months now, he could very well be a very attractive head coaching candidate come that next coaching carousel. You look at a guy like Mel Tucker, went from the Georgia defensive coordinator role to the Colorado head coach job. I think this is absolutely a job, and Lanning is a very attractive candidate. It makes sense why Kansas would want him. But if you're Lanning, I think if things go well for this Georgia defense this year, which they very well could, if Georgia has the season a lot of us think that they can have, he's going to be a very attractive name, and quite frankly, he's going to be able to get jobs that are better than Kansas. And because of that, I think it's smart of him to wait, to be patient, and say, hey, I know I can cash in now, take sort of the guaranteed. If I really want the Kansas job, he could probably get it. But save your chips a little bit, wait for that really big hand, and cash in when you absolutely have the hand to do so.
And listen, the reason why I keep bringing this up is because I think there is genuine interest to find out how all this was going to play out regarding Lanning. But the other thing here is that I still think that Lanning is slightly underrated on the part of Georgia fans who obviously saw big point totals allowed in the game against Alabama and Florida a year ago. And so it's only natural that would cause some people to kind of question what's really happening with Georgia defensively. But I don't think there's anything happening with Georgia defensively that is out of whack, as you mentioned a moment ago, with kind of the overall trend in the sport towards more points and defense just kind of mattering less. But we gave you the pick six previews number the other day that on a per play basis, adjusted for opponent, Georgia still, was the top defense in the country, at least according to their metrics. And if you can take those seriously if you want to. But the point is that Dan Lanning is still doing big things, I believe, as Georgia's defensive coordinator. I think the identity transformation that's undergone here, where Georgia last year was just better at getting after quarterbacks than it had been in a number of years, even predating Kirby Smart. This was just a more aggressive pass rush team a year ago. I love that identity transformation. So even though you've got guys like Glenn Schumann or possibly Will Muschamp waiting in the wings that could have taken over for Lanning had he left, the fact that Dan is seemingly, to my eyes right now, not leaving, I take that as really good news for Georgia. Keeping him, not taking the Texas job, not taking some random head coaching job, to me is still one of the most undercovered stories of the Georgia offseason this fall.
Yeah, and to me, since he got promoted to defensive coordinator, it's been obvious, I think he's been on a track to become a head coach. And because of that, maybe people haven't always embraced him the way that they embrace other assistants, because they know ultimately he's not here for the long haul. He's going to go on to become a better head coach, or a head coach somewhere else. And I think because of that, they've always sort of viewed him as, we really like having him here. He does a great job for this program, but ultimately we know 2-3 years from now, when the guys he's recruiting are becoming star players, he's not going to be here. So, again, I expect Georgia to have a very good defense this year. I'll be interested how they change and adapt, because I do think they're going to have to be different from last year compared to this year, just because they're not as deep at outside linebacker. But if Lanning does what he did last season and the tinkers that he made, and those continue this year, I expect Georgia still to have a very good defense, even if you're pretty worried about those cornerbacks that they have out there.
I'll go back to the 2019 LSU team a moment ago because I mentioned them. I think what that team proved is, in some cases, your defensive identity matters more than your actual stats do. The LSU defense in 2019 was pretty, by national championship standards, pretty mediocre.
Yeah.
But they were better than most at sacking the quarterback and pretty good when it comes to actually knocking balls out of the air. Derek Stingley had a bunch of passes broken up, for instance. So they were kind of not great statistically speaking, but their personality of, hey, we're going to make some of those havoc plays. We're going to get after in the backfield a little bit. Clavon Chasen, for instance. We're going to, go out there and defend some passes and make it hard to make big passing plays on us. In that particular case, it was an identity that worked, even though the overall defensive statistics were probably not that great.
Right, and that's what Georgia is ultimately, in an ideal world, Georgia would love to do both. They'd love to be that stingy defense that in 2019 didn't give up a rushing touchdown to a running back, and combine that with 2020 where, sure, they gave up a few more plays, but they also sacked the quarterback, created more turnovers at a higher rate. And I think combining that is going to be a very difficult task for Lanning, but I think he's absolutely someone who can meet and accomplish that.
All right, good stuff. Connor, thanks for being here on our Kroger Fresh Take. We'll look forward to reading a whole bunch from you at DawgNation.com.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure, B.A.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
A lot of SEC stuff to roll through now with our SEC Through. Let's make sure we do that. I'm going to try to do this fairly quick because I want to kind of get it all in here. I'm going to start with something just amazing, how long it seems like Kirby Smart era has been going on. I saw where former Alabama linebacker Ben Davis has announced his plans to transfer to Texas. And when I think about Davis, like one of the things that always kind of, comes to mind for me is the work that Georgia was kind of doing there leading up that 2016 recruiting cycle, trying to get him as a part of Kirby Smart's first class. I mean, doesn't that seem like 1,000 years ago? But here's Davis, still in big-time college football, now moving on to Texas. Obviously, Steve Sarkisian knows him, having worked there in Tuscaloosa. But that's a pretty big-time former name that was a big recruit, never quite found that home on the field for the Crimson Tide. We're going to try things new there at Texas, and I guess kind of a blast for the past from those who were following Georgia's 2016 recruiting cycle there pretty closely. By the way, speaking of the state of Texas, the other major program there in that state is Texas A&M. It's kind of funny. There are a lot of people who mock me, for those of you who may not be quite aware. They think that I talk too much about Texas A&M during this space of the show, because I do believe that A&M is a legit contender for the SEC West this year. I'm always kind of looking for that kind of somewhat contrarian take, that semi-surprise team, and I was kind of on Texas A&M a year ago. I'll claim victory on that, and now looking to see that maybe even improved upon here this upcoming year. But some people think that my desire to kind of find that team leads me to talk about them a little too much. So now my Twitter mentions, about half my Twitter mentions these days seem to be just listeners or viewers to this program who are tagging me in like random Texas A&M news because they know that they think that's what I want to hear. So I got sent this story yesterday. Shadrack Banks, former 4-star wide receiver signee for the class of 2021, goes through spring practice with the Aggies there, but apparently is now leaving that program. Matt Zenitz, who reports all this transfer stuff, I think he had this first. Other folks have been doing that there as well. Banks is a big receiver. He's like 230 pounds or something like that. So this is a pretty big guy all the way around, but apparently he did not enjoy Texas A&M spring practice one way or another, because after having been there, kind of gone through it, he is now leaving. And, there's going to be a lot of this. There's going to be a lot of these names, and this is, I want to say, we've had a few of these even from that 2021 class who are now back on the open market again. So a second chance for some recruitments for some of these guys, but that's kind of ongoing here. Sounds like Banks on his way out of Texas A&M. By the way, I wanted to make sure we mentioned this because we had certainly talked about it, the twists and turns on this. So it is now official. Joe Milton is going to Tennessee. There was the report last week from some of the Florida media, because that's where Milton's from, that he was still trying to decide if he wanted to go to Tennessee or Washington State. And sometimes these guys just want to control the timing of their own announcement. We had suggested about last week that may be what's going on with Milton. This is indeed the case. He is now officially going to Tennessee. And the Tennessee quarterback situation that already includes another transfer in Hendon Hooker, former starter at Virginia Tech, and guys like Brian Maurer and Harrison Bailey who've been there at Tennessee, Caden Salter, who's currently suspended. There are a lot of names in that Tennessee quarterback derby. I know Josh Heupel was talking about some of this post-spring game on Saturday after the Vols got together for their orange and white game. But now Milton officially in the fold there. I've said before, listen, if you're a quarterback-friendly coach like Heupel, easy to believe that you can get more out of Milton than the previous staff got out of him at Michigan. But there's also something to be said, and I talked about this in SEC Country Live last week, there's also something to be said for when you've got so much attrition off your program, so many big names like Lavaris Crouch and Henry To'oTo'o in the transfer portal already, why would you make a move that would only open up more players to potentially consider that transfer portal? At a certain point in time, don't you want to do something that kind of nods and gestures towards continuity? And I think not taking Milton may have been the best move for Tennessee with that in mind, especially when you've got Danny White, the Tennessee athletic director, in the pages of ESPN.com this week, preaching patience and long-term build and things like that. Bringing in Joe Milton does not seem to be a long-term build type move, but I guess that's going down. Also on the heels of the South Carolina spring game on Saturday, Shane Beamer, the Gamecocks head coach, kind of came out and said that, yes, unless something crazy happens, Luke Doty will be our starting quarterback this upcoming season. That's not a surprise. Doty's the best quarterback on that roster by a long shot. And frankly, this is one of the things that, for Mike Bobo, who's trying to reinvent himself now as Auburn offensive coordinator, this is one of the things that I think he, and I would suggest Will Muschamp got wrong a little bit last year. I thought they waited too late to push the Luke Doty button. Doty didn't have a great game when he played Georgia necessarily, but I think he clearly upgraded that South Carolina quarterback situation when he did, kind of come in there on that. So I don't know how good Doty has a chance to be, but I do think Luke gives you competency there in Columbia for new coach Shane Beamer. So he's actually probably in a better quarterback situation than some of these other SEC teams probably find themselves in. And then I'll mention this. This is just kind of a follow-up to things we've talked about before. So Xavier Worthy was a Michigan wide receiver signee. that also got out of his letter of intent. He has officially now landed at Texas, so that's a name you can take out of the portal. And then Mike Woods, as we told you he was probably going to do, I believe it is now official with him now moving on to Oklahoma. So a couple of names we've talked about and kind of wondered what might happen for them. It is now official. Worthy to Texas. A lot of folks thought that was what was going to go down to begin with. Mike Woods to Oklahoma. And that's one of those things that, boy, that came along really fast. Some of this transfer stuff goes really, really fast, and that's an example of one that's, you had Arkansas like tweeting about Mike Woods after their spring game, and then 2 days later, you got, Oklahoma writers saying he's coming to Norman. It's an odd world we live in sometimes, but nonetheless, we'll make that your SEC through. All right, so as we get ready to wrap up today, let me remind you that you can always participate in our Gator Hater Roll Call. We love identifying some of the great Georgia fans who love hating on those Gators in our section here on the show each and every day. So hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily, or you can go and just share with me whatever you want to share. We'll make you a potential winner for our golden shoe each and every day here to close out our show, DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. I'll also remind you that one of the great ways to get involved in all the things we're doing from a video standpoint, including the show each and every day, is to be a DawgNation YouTube subscriber. The great thing is there, you can actually set your notifications to find out every time we go live, and all of the great press conference video and player interviews and all the things that go on there. It's all cataloged right there at the DawgNation YouTube page. So thanks for becoming a subscriber for those of you who have. I'll invite the rest of you to join us there, DawgNation on YouTube. And by the way, speaking of those lousy, stinking Gators, how about a Gator Hater countdown? 186 days from right now, Georgia goes to Jacksonville, beats the Gators. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down as we take your comments on all the stuff related to UGA. And, of course, R.S. Andrews can take care of you for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. It's one of the reasons why I enjoy recommending them, because I'll know they'll do really good work for you. I'm going to start on YouTube today, and then we'll do Facebook after that. And Jay Shipe says I'm not hyping the Twitch stream anymore. No, I still need to do that. I guess, for whatever reason, people just seem to like the way the notification stuff works on YouTube, especially in comparison to Facebook, that's kind of gotten not quite as consistent about sending out those notifications. So a big push on the YouTube thing is it is a video platform that functions pretty well. Now, for those of you that watch on Facebook, I'm happy that you like the show where you like it. A lot of people use Facebook, so that makes their video platform valuable, even though the video operation is probably not quite as good as what YouTube does. Frank Patterson says Clemson can't put pressure on our quarterback if we're running the football. Hashtag the more you know. Hashtag free the toss sweep. So there you go on that. Jim McLaughlin says that Woods thing is just weird. Yeah, here's what's weird to me about it. And I'm not presuming to know what happened with this, but for all these things, when the timing is it's such a compact timeline. I mean, like I said, I got to be really careful because it's going to make it sound like I'm making an accusation. So let's just say player X leaves a program, and then 2 days later, he's transferring to program Y. I mean, do you really think a player would make such a bold move without a pretty good idea this school had a spot waiting for him? And all of this seemingly happening in just a couple of days' time, I just think that nobody seems to care that sometimes this contact seems to start before the player officially goes into the transfer portal. Nobody seemed to care about that when it comes to Tyreek Stevenson, and people don't seem to care about that when it comes to player XYZ, whomever else. But that's the rule to me that ought to seem like we should have some sort of protection for. That once you sign a guy to your roster, the idea that you've got to keep re-recruiting him every day, otherwise, some ne'er-do-well coach is going to come in and try to poach off your roster. That's the thing that I don't think college football coaches should have to deal with. There ought to be some sort of, if you hire a real estate agent, for instance, it is illegal for like a bunch of other real estate agents to kind of come over and say, hey, are you happy with your current agent? Because if you're not, you can fire them and hire me. Like, the contract offers you some sort of protection in that regard. And I think the same thing ought to be true for, for some of these players when it comes to, transfer portal and things like that. If you want to put your name in the portal, that's fine. But maybe I'm just old-fashioned. Maybe it's just sort of a quaint idea. But I'm just not quite so sure that contact should begin until the player has officially announced his intentions to leave. And listen, I have no idea what went on with Mike Woods in Oklahoma. I truly don't. I'm not making any kind of insinuation there. Just some of these really, really tight windows of transfer portal to new home. Boy, you wonder how it all happens so fast sometimes. All right, let's see what else is going on. Russell Batten checking in to say Davis, Wyatt, and Walker plus Smith or Anderson both. He says DJ Ukulele's Uyunglele. I think he actually spelled it that way. Uyunglele is going to be crying, and you may very well be right about that, Russell, for sure. You may very well be right about that. All right, let's see what else is going on. West Georgia Dog fan says, are you going to be happy if the Falcons take Kellerman in the later rounds? No, I don't quite think so. Listen, I like Jimbo and I like Texas A&M pretty well. But some of the Mond love pre-draft is a little bit weird to me, to be completely honest with you. That's not exactly what I'd be looking for the Falcons to do there. I still want the Falcons to take Justin Fields at 4. And I know now would you mind, I know you're doing 1,000 things, Connor. Would you mind taking the Gator Hair thing down? I know you're doing 1,000 things. But I still want the Falcons to take. I just now looked up and realized it was still up there. I still want the Falcons to take Fields at 4. As I said before, I know there seems to be some souring on that in the minds of some of the pre-draft people. But if I was the Falcons, that's what I would do. Especially, now there's like legit buzz that you're, moving on from Julio Jones, could do that after June 1st. Maybe some people would say, well, that's more of a reason to take a pass catcher. But to me, it's just more of a reason to rebuild the organization the way that you want it to be for the future. And listen, there are a lot of teams who've drafted wide receiver in the top 5, and not all of them are happy with the choices they've made there. So that's kind of what I would do. Let's see what else. Grundy says UGA does not have a player like Miles Murphy. Yeah, Clemson's got some of those good defensive linemen. Murphy and obviously Brian Brzee. There's no question they got a lot of those good ones. I mean, it's a tough defensive line. Tough defensive line. Jacob8927 says, is there a Matt tally over here on YouTube? I don't know. Green Soldier says, according to scouts, Mond and Trask are essentially scoring the same in overall ability. I thought Trask was a world beater. Both are good in the right system. Yeah, I mean, I do think that what happens for Kyle Trask. Now, listen, Trask as a player at Florida exceeded what I ever thought was possible for him. So even I have to admit that. But I do think it's a little bit of an interesting tell for those who want to tout Dan Mullen as this huge quarterback guru. If another Jimbo Fisher quarterback, in this case Mond, who was not really on a lot of folks' radar before the start of the season, if Mond ends up being what I think has been mentioned as possible, second-round pick or something like that, if he ends up going that high in the draft, then it is a nod in the favor of Jimbo. And for someone like Jimbo who also seems to do well against Mullen on the field, to me that just seems like you got to notice that. Chad Williams says try to trade down this year. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about the trading down thing is obviously it's easy to understand why Atlanta would want to stockpile picks, but a lot of this trading down stuff ends up being kind of hard because I don't know. It seems like sometimes, and I actually heard this about Atlanta media talk, whatnot. They're just holding out for such a big haul, they end up pricing themselves out of their own market on that. But because where they sit there at number 4, with the desire that some teams have for Pitts or those extra quarterbacks there, maybe even could you convince Cincinnati that you might seriously consider taking Penei Sewell and get a chance to get some juice from Cincinnati or something along those lines. But it just seems like sometimes it's kind of hard to actually set the market for the trade down because these teams want so much to do so. Hugh Nash says, please tell Matt Talley to get back over here. His family's very worried. So was that Matt really over there on YouTube? That's interesting. Randy Hall says, interesting names in the Walter Camp 2022 mock draft. Kyle Hamilton, Brenton Cox, Pickens, Smith from UGA, Evan Neal. I mean, the Kyle Hamilton thing is not a huge surprise to me. That's one of those guys that I think a lot of Georgia folks always thought was really good. He says Jaden Hazelwood's in there, Owen Popo's in there, all projected first rounders. A lot of names that we all know very closely from following recruiting. Now, I'll also say that, Walter Camp likes to come out with those mock drafts very, very early, and the accuracy obviously takes a little bit of a hit because of that. Let's see what else. Travis McCullough says, just put out the D&D PSA APB for Matt Talley. Yeah, very interesting here. Phil Rogers talking about the idea of hanging 56 on Florida. Boy, I like the idea of that. Jacob O'Neill, very funny. Tennille Calvino looking for Matt Talley here. Yeah, Matt, you got folks worried about you over here. That's really funny. Moose Thames says this is a nice shirt. Thank you, Moose. So this is the original Dog Nation shirt. This is like before we had any Dog Nation gear whatsoever. This is the original that we had. Like, I'm not typically, not that I have anything against it. I'm not typically a big Under Armour wearer, but this was the very first ever Dog Nation shirt. Randy Hall wondering about commits before the month ends. Obviously, it seems like Georgia's in a good position for, we talked about Robinson yesterday, Kamari Wilson last week, but, I just don't know how quickly they're pulling the trigger and all that. It seems like a lot of guys maybe wanting to wait to take some of these visits first. Keith Fold says what I described earlier is called tampering. It said it should be a fine and the loss of scholarships. Yeah, Keith, I guess that's kind of my point. Across the board here, not one specific situation, because I can't pretend to have expertise on any specific situation. But I would prefer that if you're going to have transfer, liberation here, where like a lot of folks are moving, I do think some respect for tampering rules ought to exist. I do think that. Travis McCullough says, when is the next Dog Nation invasion? Need to do one here in Augusta. So, Travis, I hope we're able to announce something in regards to that. So here's what I'm hopeful of. I'm hopeful that we're able to announce a cool event that we're going to do early summer, and I hope we're able to announce that sooner rather than later. I can't say that right now. I literally can't, but I'm hopeful that we have something on the pages, on the docket. First time to get together in person in a long time. I'm hopeful comes up here pretty soon, and then a much bigger event, a couple of months after that. So I'm not trying to play I know something you don't know game. I just am not authorized in any form or fashion to say any of this kind of stuff. But there is a strong possibility that we have 2 events coming up, and I think they're going to both be really fun. Tony Henry, that's a really good idea. How about a contest to win tickets to a game? We'd all watch the game together. I think that's a really good idea, Tony. Very good idea. Moose Thames also wants that Dog Nation invasion to Atlanta because we're going to be in the SEC Championship. I like the idea of that. Matt Rukavina says we need to have a in-person R.S. Andrews cool down at the Chattahoochee in Helen. That'd be fun, too. Tennille Calvino says, I'll have to fly all the way back after a 4-hour drive to airport. Wow, tell me when. Yeah, Tennille, we'll have to make sure we get you out from California for something like that. I'd love to have you there for that. Daniel Aldrich says Gators wear the Under Armour brand. I think Gators are actually a Jordan brand now. Under Armour, I think, is still Auburn. Under Armour used to be Auburn and Maryland and Notre Dame. I think it's still most of those. Yeet a Cookie says Augusta's hometown. Yeah, we've done a couple things in Augusta before. Really, I love it over there. Robert Barnes also says there should be a deadline date for transfers. I don't mind the idea of that either.
There actually will be. You have to notify your school by May 1st going forward.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that. When does that take effect? Has that always been true?
That with the new transfer rule, that'll be what it is. And that is expected to be ratified tomorrow, the 28th.
So what I thought it was, you just had to be there by the time that school started.
No.
Okay. Yeah.
You have to be notified. This year it's July 1st because they're giving players more time to make that transfer, but going forward, it will be May 1st.
Well, there you go. That sounds somewhat fair to me. It sounds pretty good. Green Soldier also says Ohio State and UGA could have the same results considering Clemson was better last year than this year, or should I say proven better. Still kind of weighing in with some of our Clemson debate over there. HR Picking Stuff says Falcons need a new coach more than a quarterback. Super Bowl choke was ridiculous. Well, you do have Arthur Smith stepping in there now, so Johnny Lester says this segment is boring. Peace out and go Dogs. Well, Johnny, I'm sorry I'm not entertaining you today. I apologize for that, but I'm glad that you checked in nonetheless. Between the trenches, so glad I got an Aziz autograph at G-Day. Going to be a stud of the next level. I agree with you. No matter when he's taken, I do think Ojulari has a great chance to have a very good pro career. Let's see what else. Robert Barnes giving Connor some thanks for clearing that up. That is good stuff. James Bond wondering how Cade Mays liking that environment at UT. Yeah, I think the Tennessee situation is just a mess. Now, there's something to be said for playing for the school that maybe you grew up dreaming of playing for, so maybe that's what's going on there. But I do think that situation is kind of a mess. All right, we are going to get ready to go here. Anything else we want to hit before we leave? Earl Smith and Chad Williams talking about Kendall Milton having a very big year this year. Boy, I'd love to see it. It's a deep stable of Georgia running backs, and obviously Kendall Milton's a big part of that for sure. For sure. Matt Rugvina says he made a troll disappear on Facebook. Mark Drury says Georgia needs to get back to the good old-fashioned tradition of using Florida like a doormat every year. I like the idea about that. Reggie Walker says the one thing about drafting a dual threat such as Justin Fields, the more you gamble and scrambling in the NFL, the greater your chances are of getting injured. Then you have to worry about the quarterback sitting behind Fields, as exciting as Michael Vick was. So, I mean, I guess what I'd say about that is, I mean, I think if Justin's a pretty, big guy, the kind of guy that may be more able to kind of take a pounding than maybe than you compare him to Michael Vick, who to me was always a little bit slighter build than what I think of as Justin Fields having. So, I mean, you do have to be careful with that, right? It is same thing in the NBA too. It's like early in your career, you're driving to the lane all the time and you're getting knocked down a bunch, and over the course of your career, you do have to find a way to play a little different way just to preserve yourself, longevity. Same thing is, I think, probably true with quarterbacks who like to run there as well. As you get older, you probably need to do that a little bit less. But, certainly that was one of the things I always liked about Fields was he seemed to have the stature to be able to withstand some of that. Calvin Sanders likes the idea of planning something for an away game sometime. I think that'd be a really fun thing. Bill Sanders, more often than not, that kind of seems like it's kind of true. Daniel Aldrich, thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate that. Mark Brantley talking about coordinators for Georgia. I think Glenn Schumann, he says, has a potential to be a great coordinator. Muschamp's already a great coordinator. I think that's all true, but I think for right now, Georgia's in very, very good hands when it comes to what Dan Lanning brings to the table with, nice options waiting in the wings if and when you ever needed something like that. All right, last thing over here on YouTube, then we are truly going to go. Let's see what else is going on. Kurt Strickland says Quavaris Couch, the Tennessee linebacker, is going to Michigan State. So I missed that. I missed that. I'll have to look into that, Kurt, but you're kind of wondering where he was going to go. So if that ends up being true, that's a big win for Mel Tucker there if that's true. So I'll have to look into that. All right, we're going to get ready to go. Good stuff all the way around. Thanks for being here for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Y'all check them out online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. Also, make sure you check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online, ajc.com. You can kind of keep up with the Braves. A little bit better night last night after an awful Sunday doubleheader. They kind of got back to their winning ways last night against Chicago. Nice to see. Also, Hawks continue to be a hot team after winning on Sunday against Milwaukee. How'd they do against Detroit last night? They win last night? They lost to Detroit last night. Well, still got a big win over the weekend. You can read more about that. Atlanta News Now, ajc.com. Also, all kinds of just big-time news to follow there. Georgia growing, by the way. More than 1 million people added via the most recent census. A lot of folks like living in the Peach State, it sounds like. You can read about that online. Atlanta Journal-Constitution at ajc.com. You have a great day. See you back here tomorrow at 10 a.m. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.